resources, dictatorships in the region that are in clear violation of human rights, like the Arab dictatorships I mentioned, or like the State of Israel with its policies in the occupied territories. This is the plan of the U.S. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is why? Why is it so important for the U.S. to control the Middle East? Or why is it so important for the U.S. to fund friendly regimes in the region that would look out for U.S. Interests in the region? And the answer I have is a simple answer, and it's probably one that all of you have heard before. It's oil. It's the natural resources of the Middle East, specifically oil. The Middle East has over 60% of the proven oil reserves in the world. And in the world that we live in the capitalist economically driven world that we live in, oil is essential. So the U.S. needs oil for consumption. But an important fact is that the important reality is that the U.S. actually does not import the majority of its oil for consumption from the Middle East. Most of the oil that the U.S. imports comes from Latin America or from Canada. And although controlling the oil in the Middle East will become important in the future for consumption, the reality is that controlling Middle Eastern oil is important for two other reasons. One is for profits. That is, granting access to oil to U.S. corporations is essential to safeguarding the economy of the U.S. And hopefully most of you know that one of the reasons that the Bush administration and their Democratic supporters in Congress that gave Bush the power to go into Iraq, one of the reasons they were so keen on going into Iraq sooner rather than later was because it was clear that the sanctions against Iraq would shortly be lifted, and that standing contracts that Saddam Hussein had with Total Fina Elf, the major oil corporation from France, standing contracts with Lukoil from Russia, and so on, contracts that Saddam Hussein had signed with European oil companies would have taken effect, and major U.S. oil companies would have been cut out of the deal. So we went to war to safeguard the profits of ExxonMobil, of Texaco Chevron, and so on. And if we just look at the profits of these companies since the war started, it's clear. ExxonMobil in the last 2 years has had record high profits, the highest profits of any corporation, any private corporation in the history of corporations. This in the middle of a war in the Middle East that we are told is not about oil. The other reason that's perhaps even more important is the use of oil as a weapon. That is, if the U.S. controls oil resources in the Middle East, then it means it controls the economies and the militaries of other rival capitalist imperialist powers in the world, like the European Union, like Russia, like China in particular. By having its hand on the spigot, controlling where the oil goes, it undermines the ability of other imperialist power to challenge the U.S., not only in the Middle East, but in other areas in the world, like Latin America, like Africa, and like the increasingly more crucially important Central Asia. And these are the reasons that we're seeing an intensifying of the conflict in the Middle East more generally, and an intensifying of the conflict in Israel-Palestine, and intensifying of the contradiction and debate in this country over Israel-Palestine. We should take Jimmy Carter's and others like him's criticisms of the human rights crime in Gaza and on the West Bank seriously, because it's a reality. The populations of the occupied territories are suffering tremendously under the violence of the Israeli state, supported by U.S. arms and funding. But we also have to be wary, because we have to be clear that Jimmy Carter's interest in a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is part of a larger plan to secure U.S. presence in the Middle East, to secure support from Sunni dictatorships in the area, for U.S. plans in Iraq, for U.S. plans in Afghanistan, and for probably future attacks on Iran. So we have to understand the conflict in the Middle East, particularly the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, within this larger global conflict of imperialisms, of U.S. imperialism and its rivalries against China, Russia, the European Union, other imperialist powers. And I think we have to understand it in terms of who benefits from these decisions that are being made? Do the Israeli working class and do the Palestinian workers in the occupied territories benefit from the decisions being made by their governments? Do workers here and students here benefit from the fact that we have an over $600 billion war budget, by the fact that we continue to spend more money on funding, arms funding for countries in the Middle East? Do we benefit from cuts in education, from the tuition has gone up since 2000 for all of us, from the slashing of workers' wages, from the cutting of pensions and so on? Do we benefit? These are all the crimes of imperialism, perhaps not felt so directly for us, but as the years go on and the months go on, we're going to start feeling them here too. And now is the time to stand in solidarity with those across the world that are feeling the brunt of U.S. imperialism, the brunt of imperialism more viciously. Because in the future, we're going to be feeling the same brunt. And already our brothers and sisters are being sent to fight and die in Afghanistan and Iraq. Already our necessary social funding is being cut and spent to use and to fund weapons that are killing Palestinians in the occupied territories, that are killing Iraqi workers in Iraq. What we need is an understanding that we're in this together. That what we need is international solidarity. And for that reason, I'm glad that the MSU is bringing attention to this struggle and that they've invited me to speak today as a step toward that international solidarity, to making connections between these issues that are sorely needed. Connections that hopefully become the basis for a larger movement to imagine a different world and to imagine the first steps that we need to take to create that world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis, and thank you all for coming to the third day of Never Again the Palestinian Holocaust. We have with us today our esteemed guest, Miss Anna Baltzer. She's an American Jewish Columbia graduate, and she traveled to the Middle East in 2003, and ever since then she's been going back every year as part of the International Women's Peace Service to document the human rights abuses and violations, and she promotes nonviolent resistance to the occupation. Be sure to stick with us after the Q&A. We have a little surprise for all y'all. And without further ado, Miss Anna Baltzer.
Hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Anna Baltzer. And if you had told me, I don't know, 5 years ago that I would be speaking here at UCI, speaking out for rights for all people, including Palestinians, I would have laughed at you. In fact, 5 years ago, I probably would have been someone wearing yellow and passing out flyers. I probably would have been there at the tent talking about the right of Israel to exist and Zionism, etc. And I say this not only to show you the way that I have personally evolved, but also to express my understanding of where this opposition is coming from, not in any kind of condescending way, but to say that I was once there. And I respect how difficult that it is to hear, especially for the first time, these terrible things that Israel's doing. So I say that to the people here who are protesting. I respect that it's difficult to hear these things, and I know that myself it was extremely difficult to hear these things for the first time. I got into this work as a Jewish American. I was teaching English in Turkey, and I started to travel through the Middle East during my vacations. I backpacked around Iran and Syria and Lebanon, and along my way I was taken in by families of what turned out to be Palestinian refugees. And now, I had never knowingly interacted with a Palestinian person before. In fact, I didn't really even know what a Palestinian was, to be honest. I wouldn't have known how to answer the question, what is a Palestinian even? And it was through my friendships, my interactions with these different families that really took me in, that I began to hear for the first time in my life this completely different version of the history and present of Israel-Palestine from anything I had ever heard or learned growing up as a Jewish American. And my first reaction was anger. I said, these people are either lying or they've been completely brainwashed.